We are all connected. So join me as I talk to like-minded people about topics that are appropriate to the current times we are living in. My name is Lerato Shabalala and this is Relevant.
Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Relevant with me, Lerato Shabalala. Remember, you can find the audio version of the podcast on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts, and you can go to my YouTube channel to watch my conversation today. Also, you can go to my website, leratoshabalala.com, to get both versions. Check out some of my content and the other great conversations I have had. I'm very excited about today's guest. I won't lie, I've had the honor of interviewing her before. So everything I'm going to ask her is for the purposes of talking to you guys. But we're also going to talk about something I think that is important to us both, which is Black people and the way we see ourselves as Black people in relation to her career. She is a phenomenal Black woman, like just somebody that's impressive on paper and in person and is stylish and is cute and is smart and is funny. She is Dr. Same Mdluli, who is the manager and the curator at the Standard Bank Art Gallery here in Johannesburg in South Africa. She's an art historian. She has been a lecturer. Just welcome, Same. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Loretta, and thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. The last time we saw each other, we were at a hotel in Rosebank.
Yes.
We were having drinks and life was normal. And then,
Little did we know.
So it's just really nice to have this conversation. And I know the next time we see each other, we'll give each other a bear hug and just really like have some wine and be like, what a year. What a year. You are.
Yeah.
Guys.
Yeah.
So how have you been during this time? I mean, before we get into it, how have you been coping during this time? Because art galleries are wonderful communal spaces, and people have been doing a lot of sort of virtual tours. And I wonder, I've had the pleasure of a walkthrough with you when you did your Black aesthetic exhibition last year, and so I know the intimacy of walking around, people asking questions. How has it been like in your profession in this new COVID-19 normal?
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is that gallery spaces have definitely taken a knock.
Yeah.
And as you're mentioning, it's precisely because they are essentially social spaces, right?
Exactly.
And yes, sometimes I think there are people that come to visit the gallery to be alone and have that kind of solitude. But I think the point is the space is important. The way in which we experience art, the space is important. And looking at art in a screen just isn't, the same. So there's something about looking at an actual artwork in the space that it's been put in and installed. Because again, I think space is about there's a political kind of connotation to be able to look at an artwork in its totality inside a space, inside a white cube, and the context within which you're seeing it. Whether it's then you're looking at it in isolation, or you're looking at it in relation to other pieces. That in itself tells you, the importance of having space. So moving into the virtual space really has been, I think, a challenge, because again, while I think that aspect kind of there's advantages and disadvantages to it. The advantage, I would say, is that of course we've been allowed to reach. It allows a reach of a wider audience. Exactly. So, I can just send a link, for example, to somebody sitting in Paris or in the US, and they'll be able to go in and look at it. But again, as I'm stressing, it's not the same as being in the actual space. And then, the disadvantage again is also that there's a deception in having a screen or looking at an artwork with a screen, because one, it's a scale thing, right? Where an
Exactly.
artwork that might be like
Huge.
life size looks
Exactly.
this minuscule kind of on
Exactly.
a screen, and you don't get the sense of the power of that piece when you're standing in front of it. You know, same applies for sculpture, for example, which is an art form that requires you to walk around it, right? It takes up volume and mass, um, and yet you can, you're only seeing it, yes, in different angles, but part of the experience is being able to walk around it and see it in its totality. So those are kind of some of the things that have been, I think, a big challenge in terms of showcasing artworks within the virtual space.
And what have you learned about like yourself in this virtual world? And have
Yeah,
you learned that maybe you're a people's person and you actually like being out there and like interacting with people? Because we're all learning very new things about ourselves during this time,
sure.
actually.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think particularly in relation to how I engage art, and the fact that as a curator, I feel a big part of how artworks come alive is how people engage and interact with them.
Mm,
Otherwise they're just sitting there, really. It's kind of the same concept, and provocation as the saying of, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, has it actually fallen? So same thing with an artwork, is that if an artwork is placed in a gallery and nobody actually sees it, does it actually exist? Does it
exactly.
actually have meaning? So part of artworks having meaning is the fact that people need to see them and inscribe those meanings to them. Yeah.
Mm,
So that's one thing I think I've learned, is that yeah, the way in which in art, as much as we've had to adapt in, particularly in the visual art space, we really do rely on having audiences, on having, people interact and engage with these artworks, because after all, as well, we want people to, we want writers to go back and write about them. We want, you know people to go back and talk about the artwork,
yes.
and yeah, so that's a big part of how the artwork comes alive.
So I think I want to go straight into it because, like me, you have the tendency to be very provocative, whether or not you mean to.
Yes.
And um, and when you were announced as the manager and curator of the Standard Bank Art Gallery, I think on some level it was a celebration for us, particularly Black women and Black people. It was a really seminal moment, but you also stamped it with a very particular way. You made a splash last year with the Black aesthetic. I remember doing the walkthrough, and there were several questions that were thrown at you. Why didn't you have enough women? So you took artwork from Fort Hale. Why didn't you add this person? Why didn't you add this person? But I loved the fact that you were very intentional about, I want to start, I am Black, and I want to start with Black people. So I want to ask, when that idea came to mind, did you have that little thing of fear that says, oh, I don't know, or were you just like, no, this I've wanted to do this, I now have the chance, and so I'm going to.
I think, yes, as when you start out, and that was quite intentional, by the way. I think for me it was on two levels. It was, the first one was that it was very important to me to start with an exhibition that would, one, pay homage to, the Black artists that made it possible for me, even as a young Black scholar, to want to have a career in art. But more so, it was also a homage to say, because of the kind of history that South Africa has had, these artists have not had the luxury or the platform to have their artworks shown in prestigious spaces, right? And Standard Bank, of course, being considered one of the prestigious art spaces.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, some of those artworks were have never even hung on a wall, that was considered as, you know, a wall where you could contemplate what it is that they were actually engaged in. So that was one level. And then the second was, again, going back to this question around the images of Black people, is that as a scholar, I think one of the things that really affected me in all the books that we looked at, in all the art history classes that we attended, is this lack of images of people who look like me. And it was, again, going back to the question of, is it that these images don't exist, or they've been erased in some way from the art history kind of narrative. And over the years, I think there've been many Black artists that have addressed this question of the fact that, the reason why there is this perception that Black people don't go to galleries is precisely because they don't see images of people that look like them.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah. So, and in a way, when the numbers came of at the end of this exhibition, I really felt vindicated, because I was like, there you go. That's all that you needed to do, is to have more exhibitions and more showcasings that actually relate to people, and then they'll want to engage, and then they want to come in and see, because if you put in things that people don't relate to, of course they're not going to be interested.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think what you did is validate so many of us who love art, but struggle sometimes with having to see the same old, and just being like, okay, beyond the normal white faces that we know, is there more? Because I also think that what you had, so many different artists, Dumile Feni, I remember that amazing
Yeah.
life size. I've got a picture of you standing in front of it. And I think what you did for us is that you showed us in our most beautiful, expressive way. But I also know that as you studied the history of art, and I have noticed that things like Christianity, where white people have painted it in their own image, right? And so even when you hear people talk about Jared Sokoto and how amazing he was, when I was editing Lifestyle for his centenary, we did a cover story on him. So he's a very important person to us as South Africans. But
Yeah.
you hear every time a Black artist is referred to, is he reminds us of whoever. He seems to have picked this up from wherever, as though we have
Sure.
no original thought, as if we cannot see the world without seeing it through the white gaze, which is very, for me, it's both hilarious, and
Yeah.
I'm perplexed by it. So was there a reawakening in your mind when you were studying the history of art, where you're like,
Mm.
where are our people here? Where are the people that look?
Yes. Yeah. No, definitely. And I mean, one artist that comes to mind in that regard is also is Ernest Mannor.
Mm.
um and it's also because, I mean, similar to by the way, Ernest Mannor is the one who encouraged Gerald Sokoto to go to Paris and pursue his art
Oh
career.
wow, I had no idea.
Yes. Yes. So, and then he kind of also lived, in Europe for many years. But I think what interests me about Mangoba also is because he was very conscious about him being a black person in Europe, and then being African as well. Um, and what that meant to be in a space where he was around many other artists. But I think what he was really also questioning was, what do I as an African contribute to the space of creativity? And not so much about, that I need to adapt or assimilate. It was more of, what can I teach my counterparts about where I come from, um, which is a whole other, I think, way of looking at it, particularly in terms of modernism and modern art, because we, you know, African artists are not normally associated with modernity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's flawed, right? Because, you know, if we look at, if you want to interrogate this question of modernism and modernity, or the modern subject, um, black, you know, the black subject, how do we start to um, uh, 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 write the narrative that kind of substantiates the fact that black people have always, you know, had been, you know, involved in this evolving of the world into modernism.
Exactly.
um and you have to look, you know, you only, I mean, Mangloba was interested in ancient art practices, like the Benin bronze heads in Nigeria. You know, he was interested in masks, that were, again, you know, they became a big part of how people like Picasso and you know, um a whole lot of other European modern masters kind of, you know, took and borrowed from. But I think his whole thing was also this whole question around, how do I, as a black artist, inscribe myself into this narrative of modernism and modernity as a modern subject. Yeah.
I I I love in your talk that I was listening to earlier today, when you were talking, you gave a lecture about Mr. Ernest Mannor. One of the questions you ask is, um, you talk about the Western conceptions of what it means to be human, right? So,
Yes.
and I loved that, because if you think of our humanity as Black people, um, or the lack thereof, and how we're portrayed, is we are savages, we have no history, we need to be taught
Mm-hmm.
everything, we don't know what's what. And yet, when you look historically, in terms of where life started, and some of the things that we wear art, you know what I mean, our hairdresses, that stuff is art. It's us, we live it, and yet it was totally like ignored. So how do you, as a Black woman, knowing that, for a long time people have seen us as the cleaners, the take people who take care of people, and not really knowing, depending on who you're talking to, about art, and you coming into that space and owning it to the point where you become a curator, like how how brave do you have to be to go into such an intensely white world? Because art is white, please. don't,
Yeah.
don't make no
Yes.
mistake. We can count several people, but even gallery owners in South Africa who have lasted. The Black ones, it's been a struggle, just simply because we don't get
Yeah.
support. So, how did you manage to still your nerves and say, I don't give up? I am going to
Yes.
push this forward and make this a career and inspire the rest of us. Thank God.
Yeah. Sure. You know, I think a big part of that, you know, determination and, you know, to want to persevere, but also, and I'm not going to use the word, I'm not going to use the phrase of wanting a seat at the table. No,
Table.
no, no, no. It was more of, there are other tables that
Yes.
we should be occupying. um and and being, you know, uh, 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 you know, being able to be authoritative at those tables, and so much so that, um that other table can glance at us and say, oh wow, look at what's happening at that table. You
Exactly.
know, I want to become a part of that, as opposed to us always wanting a seat at some other table.
Yeah. Excuse me.
You
Can
know.
I have a
Yes.
seat? You know, sit at the end. Is it okay?
Exactly. And you know, and I think, also a big part of it also came from the fact that I think, from an early age I recognized that, as Black people we are creative. It may have not been, labeled as art, or even commoditized in the same way
Definitely.
as, you know, how commercial art and you know has been now. But and part of the reason why I also did my PhD on, I mean, I focused on so-called rural artists. So artists like Jackson Hlongwane and Mam Noria Mabasa. And these are, again, one of the things I was looking there was the question of the self-taught artist and a formally trained artist. All those artists that I looked at were mostly self-taught, which means their inspiration and inclination to make art came from elsewhere. It was not about the vocation of, wanting to learn and be trained with a particular day. This was something that they had in them.
Yeah.
And somewhat a little bit like having a calling of some sort, where
Yes.
the manifestation of that is then to make objects that then become, creative, but they have a very particular function. And if you look at someone like Jackson Hlongwane, he built a whole shrine in Bokoto that was, he used as part of his teachings. But they were not made; those objects were not made to be sold in a gallery. They had a particular purpose. And so I think African art has always functioned in that way in some respect. And in fact, right now I'm also kind of grappling with a paper that I'm writing around African spirituality and art, precisely to go back to this question of what is it that inspires artists like that, who are not necessarily making art for the commercial gain or the commercial attributions that it has, but rather that it's coming from more of from a place of spirituality and cosmology and beliefs and belief systems that are very grounded on this being African here.
Mm.
So yeah.
I must say, I love the fact that you are combining spirituality and art. If you think about how famously people talk about the Last Supper, that's an artwork. And it's quite interesting that everybody on the table is white, but you know what I mean? But
Sure.
that's something else completely. Um,
Yeah.
I think that what spirit does is the reason why we call it inspiration. You are in spirit, right? So
Yeah.
you're in that space of spirit, of otherworldliness that is beyond you, that is outside of studying knowledge and the typical things, but is the thing that is within you. I I wonder when you are when people came back at you, because you had a little bit of backlash. Keep going
Yeah.
back there. I remember reading an article about like, oh, how could she decide? How did she choose? And there's something really interesting when a black woman has a point of view and she's not afraid to say it. Then suddenly it's like, who's the man that let her talk? That's one of the things.
Yes.
About. Who was the guy that allowed her to speak? Were you
Yeah.
expecting something as, because here's the thing, if you're a white curator and your entire exhibition had white artists, nothing would have stood out. Nobody would have said, oh my God, why are there no black people? But the moment you decide to, seriously, you were not excluding anyone, you were just saying it's a curation of these artists. I went to Fort Hare, I picked this up. That's all you were doing. It suddenly
Yeah.
became layered. Oh, why didn't you? How did you anticipate the backlash, and how did it feel knowing how important it was to you?
Yeah. No, I did anticipate it. I think, and that's precisely why it was framed in such a way or positioned in such a way that, look, I'm merely putting a lens on a historical moment, um, and trying to really interrogate what this historical moment means or meant. And that's the thing. I think, in art, one of the things I've also learned particularly in curating, is that you won't be able to please everyone. People come with their own kind of, expectations about what you should and shouldn't be doing. And the moment you let go of that and come to terms with it, that look, I am not going to please everybody. There are some people that will appreciate this, and then there are others that will be critical of it. And all I can do really is learn from it, and take it with a pinch of salt, where the critique is sound and constructive and considered. So I definitely was expecting the backlash. I think if anything, as a black woman, what I've learned, like you're saying, is that anytime you want to do something and you're not, being given permission, yeah, you're you know you're asking for it, that type of thing. And um so yeah, I think so. So I was very careful as well about how I framed the intentions of the exhibition. And by the way, that exhibition, the way in which it had such a lasting impression is that I'm still getting queries today,
Mm-hmm.
till this day. I mean, I received an email from a PhD student in Germany wanting to know about an artist that was featured in that exhibition.
Wow.
And suddenly I thought, that's precisely why I did it, because my answer back to her, she was asking more, information about this artist. I was like, to be honest, there's nothing about this artist, and that's precisely why I'm doing this exhibition, so
Exactly.
that you guys as scholars can go and interrogate and dig up whatever it is that there is out there about these artists.
Exactly. And I
Yeah,
think you mentioned something that's so important about the specialness of Black people. The whole we can only let in one. And once we've let in that one, they have to be so exceptional and so amazing. And it's like, no,
yeah,
we're human like everybody else. There's some great
sure,
artists, there's some that are not so great, but our humanness is what makes us who we are. And
yes,
so I'm wondering, you've also been a lecturer, and I
yeah,
think so one of the most important things that's going to come out of this COVID-19 space is we're all, if you are not tuned to it already, we're all realizing we need to be educated about our world, about our history, about who we are. What do you think needs to change in the way that art is taught in schools? And I mean, as a
mm,
scholar, you've been there, and I know that every institution, runs in a particular way. So, what are the things that need to change? I think, or that you would like to see change, that can possibly
yeah,
move us forward? Because the
yeah,
representation, as you said, is key. So I love art anyway, but I remember the Black aesthetic, and I think I keep getting queries on it because it represented me. I could pronounce the people's names. I wasn't concerned, and you could too, as my curator.
sure,
We were very sensitive to how people were feeling, and I think that there's some of that knowledge that could go back into the schools. So what is happening right now? How is art being taught where there's an exclusionariness, especially with regards to Black people and the images
yeah,
being seen and our Black artists being celebrated?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And in fact, yesterday I was moderating a panel for all Blessing Ngubeni. I mean, Blessing is amazing because he set up this Blessing Ngubeni Art Prize, which is around mentoring and supporting younger up and coming artists. So he put together a panel of established artists like Nandi Pamtambo, Nicholas Strobo, and Lady Scully, and then himself as well. And I moderated it. And one of the questions that came up again that I posed to all four of them was around education, and the importance of art education particularly. And there were different views, but what resonated with all of them was around the fact that there isn't a formula. Um, there isn't a formula, particularly in art, and what you get out of the education system, particularly because I think with the access to art education in South Africa has been a neglected kind of area that it's for those who can afford it, for example.
Yeah.
But what is interesting, and this is another conversation that I had with somebody else earlier this morning, which is around the art centers, particularly the art centers that we saw. I mean, right now they kind of they've faded, in the townships. So your Fuba, Funda Art Center, which I think is still around. But the importance of those art centers to teaching and training young creators and artists, and the fact that nobody knows what was happening in those art centers. There's
Mm.
no literature, you know, around what is it that everyday kids would go and gather and do in those spaces.
Yeah.
Um, and that is where, again, I think in the larger scheme of the education system, and here I'm talking about your universities and the art schools that are so well resourced, is that it is important that they start including these kinds of you know whether it's a course around, you know, South African art centers, and then inviting those people who, by the way, somebody like Bra Charles Nkosi, who has ran Funda Center for the past 30 years, is
Yeah.
still alive. You know,
Yeah.
he's a living kind of um, what's the word? I call him a living encyclopedia,
Yeah.
because if you want to know about any black artist that went through those you know those classes in Funda, he'll tell you about it. um and so it's about, again, I think those of us, and that was one of the reasons why I was also partly wanting to pursue a, you know, an academic career, was because, again, going back to the to what I learned as a scholar, and as a student, a postgraduate student, undergrad, is seeing this, you know, this lack of engaging those kinds of people and spaces and subject matter, and then asking myself, is it because they can't find anyone to come and teach these things, you know, or and that was not true, because I was like, but there's Brad Charles, why can't he be invited, for example, to come and give a seminar for an hour to students and
Exactly.
talk about, yeah, you know, why can't we start a whole program around, you know, maybe five, and select five black artists, for example, and focus on them, and say, okay, go and give assignments to students, and say, go and do research on these five artists, and see what you come up with, and
Mm.
then present something to the class. So it's about, I think, again, having the right people within those institutions that will start probing and you know, advocating for those kinds of you know, classes and courses to take precedent, as much as, you know, your Western art history, for example, takes, you know, precedence in those kinds of programs. So it's slowly, you know, I mean, there's also the question of gatekeeping, and that's a real thing, a very real thing.
Yep.
Of, you'll come there as a young black lecturer and propose these things, and then, you know, there's ways of finding, of saying, no, you can't, you can't. And so for me, again, I think what being able to have one foot outside of the academy, and then, you know, work in a space like Standard Bank, for example, is that it has allowed that for me to be able to propose, okay, I can't do it, you know, like this in this institution, so I'm just gonna go around this way and and enter back door type of thing,
Yeah.
so much so that you cannot ignore me. um yeah, which is, yeah, so and there've been a lot of scholars, I think, that have taken those avenues towards trying to you know, bring about change of some sort in the way in which the discourse and the canon of art starts to transform.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah,
that it's so important what you mentioned about um, not being able to be ignored. Not you cannot ignore me, and that's the thing. Like sometimes it's not necessarily about asking for a seat at the table. Is also the
yeah,
understanding that you, as you say, you have other options. There are other tables, but also if there isn't one that looks like the one you've got, get some tools and build your own.
build another one, exactly.
Exactly. And I think that's what you have managed to do. And I want to ask a question that I think is going to be important for a lot of young people who are black and interested in art. And one of the things I want to do through this platform is I want to show people, young black people, particularly who are like us, who grew up in the hood in some shape or form, because you didn't only live in South Africa, you also lived overseas with your family. So when you are growing up in a hood situation, you sometimes realize that what are extracurricular activities actually could be your calling, but because there
Mm.
isn't enough, there isn't enough support, people end up doing the same old jobs. And I think you
Yeah.
can be famous for doing what you're doing without having to get undressed or to shake your ass or to dance. And so I was really really interested in talking to you because I want to ask you, if I'm sitting at home and I love art, how do I know that I'm an artist or that I'm a
Mm-hmm.
what is the difference? How did you know? So I'm asking
Yeah.
in a roundabout way, because to love art does not always mean you actually have to make it. So I
Yes.
love music, but I understand, I'm a fan. I buy the tickets, I go dance.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean? I'm not a singer, I'm not, and I respect that form of artistry. So how did you know for yourself that you actually were more of a curator and the love of
Mm.
art than somebody who's going to create art, just to help young people at home um,
Yeah.
navigate?
Yeah. That was also, I mean, another, I mean, I started the panel yesterday by asking all four of the panelists, when was that, as the great talk show host, Miss Oprah Winfrey, she talks about having the aha moment.
Yes.
So what was your aha moment, when you realized, okay, and it was interesting how I think, yes, all of them had a different trajectory, but the commonality in the string, I think and this also applies to me, is that when finally you were able to find a voice, and this thing becomes a channel, or the vessel that is, carrying your voice.
Mm.
And so, the same way that a writer becomes a writer and thinks, okay, the pen and being able to express these things by writing them down is giving me this way of my voice being heard. Is the same way as an artist would say, a paintbrush and being able to put this mark on a canvas is offering me, my voice. So it really, so for me, I think it's about, it was about finding, so this one thing offered me a way, because I'm not a talker, really, and sometimes I struggle articulating what it is that I'm actually, um, preoccupied with, or thinking about. And so one, art started to do that, but then with curating is I think for me it became about storytelling, or a different form of storytelling, um, and what that offered. Uh, so it's at the end of the day, I think for me, what art did is that it gave me a voice. And so for younger artists, I think it's about identifying what is it that you want to tell the world, and then thinking about what is the best way that I can do that in my most authentic, most honest, most real way. And once you find that, then you're on your way. And for some people, they find it much quicker than others. Others, it's a journey that they have to go through. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I like what you say about find your voice and the channel will come, So
Yeah.
it's not about I need to be on that channel. It's like, what do you have to say? And what's
Yes.
the medium? The medium will come as a consequence of you deciding what is your magic,
Yes.
what do you have to say? Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
repetition. People are saying what other people are saying, but the success and the magic of everything is in you. You decide
Yes.
what it is that you want to say, and then you say, what's the best way to say it? Do I write? Do I create?
Exactly.
I and then you find your own space. I think there's too much people trying to do what other people are doing, and
Precisely.
nobody can be Same. You know what I mean? You
Yeah. Yeah.
they can be inspired by you the way people like me are inspired by Miss Oprah Winfrey, but ultimately I'm African, I'm black, so hey,
Yeah.
My delivery is going to be different, and the things that I do are going to be different. I think it's so important what you say. It's so.
Yeah.
Sometimes a
Yeah.
career can lead to a calling, so
Exactly.
it's not always a straight line. So
Sure.
I want to ask you maybe sort of two more questions. Um,
Yeah.
who are the artists right now? So we all know the artists who are hot right now, as it happens in every industry, whether it's fashion or whether it's music. They're always the people who are hot right now that everybody knows.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
who are the artists that you are loving in particular? They don't only have to be exclusively South African. They
Yeah.
these people are exciting. They're talking about our blackness in a profound and wonderful way. So
Yes.
who are those people? So we can take them down,
Sure.
save our money.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, that's it's a bit of a tough question, but I'll answer it anyway because I'll answer it in such a way like you're saying it's about the now and who's resonating with
Right
me
now,
right now.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me and again I had a conversation with someone about this and she was just asking me how are you, and she was obviously asking in the context of COVID and lockdown. And I said, I'm really intrigued by how the Black Lives Matter has galvanized, America, and yes, it's spread its tentacles, yes, to the rest of the world. But I'm very curious as to why with us, particularly in South Africa, and I understand. I think it's because we have so many other things that we're dealing with, particularly gender-based violence, which has gripped us like,
Yeah,
we're hostage,
yeah,
honestly,
okay.
and corruption.
Yeah,
These two things have just kind of, so of course something like Black Lives Matter, we don't quite know how to, um, bring these other issues into that whole discourse. But for me, I'm finding the way in which Black feminists in the US have, it's almost as if all their life work has been waiting for this moment.
yes,
And finally, they're vindicated by all the work that they have done.
yes,
Because it's like, you see, and so somebody like Sadea Hartman, who's just written her book on Wayward Lives, um, which is, yeah, I've actually just started reading that, and she's been, engaged in these, kind of tracking slavery in the U.S. and looking at these radical people that, have defied um, being slaves in a sense, and being defined by the narrative of slavery. So she's one person that, and she's in literature. She's a professor, and in fact, she's come to South Africa before. I think last year she was in SA. Um, and then there's Kerry James Marshall, the artist, who started this aesthetic of painting Black people black, like as in they're pitch black. um, and yeah, and I would encourage you to just go and see, look at in YouTube and listen to James K. Marshall about how he talks about his subject matter, um, and how he's so critical around the Western art history and the way in which it erases or has erased and excluded Black people in that narrative, and how his work has been a concerted and deliberate effort to inscribe himself and, his Black subjects into this narrative in very particular ways. So these two kind of, for me, and it is because of the moment of how Black Lives Matter, they have insisted, I think, that this time we're not letting this go. You
yeah,
are going to hear us. Yeah. And the protests have been going on for 4 months now in the US. I mean,
right?
that's amazing.
Isn't it
Yeah,
incredible?
it is.
I think it's so incredible that it also goes beyond America. I've also just
Yeah,
started looking at even illustrators who are illustrating Black people really beautifully in
yeah,
America, where I'm just like, whoa, I've just,
yeah,
it's where are these people? Why are they not featured in
yes.
magazines that we buy in these shows? Like, I just don't understand. So I'm absolutely just, I'm going to Google them, I'm going to YouTube, I'm going to text you and tell you
Sure.
what I think. But ironically, also for me, a lot of the art that has been poignant for me and the music that has been poignant for me has been around Black Lives Matter, because finally, as Black people, we're just like, yo, it's enough. We are human.
Yes.
And I think the women in particular, Black women in America have done so much. You see Kamala being the vice president, you realize that, you know what, like, we have a voice, and we can use it. So
Yeah.
speaking of my last question, speaking of which, your voice, which we are so glad is out there. I know for me, yeah, it's amazing to know you, to be able to to see you do your work and move in the space. So my question to you, my last question to you is, what are the next couple of, I mean, you can't give it away, obviously.
Sure.
What are the some of the things that we can expect from you? Some of the artwork you are hoping to curate for us. I have a
Yeah.
sense there is something around women. I don't know why.
Yes. And yeah, spot on.
Because I really feel that. Anyway, so tell us, what are you gonna do? Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Women. And so I've been looking, because Standard Bank has an African art collection called that is jointly owned with Wits University, and it's housed at the Wits Art Museum.
Mhm.
And it's about 6,000 objects and material culture that is has been collected for 40 years, over 40 years of this partnership between the bank and the university. And one of the things that I think for me has been an interesting curiosity in this collection, and seeing it and engaging with it at different points, not just as a curator, but also while I was a student at Wits, having and seeing it, beadwork, and also seeing things, like people like Laduma, for example, who
Yes.
draws inspiration from it, from the techniques of beadwork, the weaving, the pottery, the headrests, and all these objects and African object is is at the core of it, and the reason why we have these things, right, is most of them were made by women.
Mm,
And that, again, it goes back to how um, women really are the carriers of our cultural heritage,
yes.
and how we don't, I'm looking at your background there with the paintings that the love paintings you have there, your cushions, all these things that are around us, in terms of how, we grow up, right, with these things around us, and how it is essentially women that have been carrying and making sure that our cultural heritage evolves in
Mm,
a very particular way. There isn't anything that, again, that acknowledges the role that African Black women have played in carrying and sustaining our cultural heritage, from the way we dress, the duke, the
exactly.
dresses, the the African attires that you see at weddings, and all of that, seamstresses, and it's women, it's Black women.
Exactly. Exactly.
um and so I've been really thinking about a show that will start to really unpack that in a way that acknowledges the contribution that Black African women have made to our cultural
Oh,
heritage.
that is exciting. Oh,
Yeah.
that is probably the most exciting thing I've heard this year. Oh, I'm so excited. I can't even tell you how excited I am because we can
Yeah.
all love Mary Sibande from afar. We can all, but it's very, very rare that you can walk through an exhibition and see Nandipa, Mary.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Just see all
Yeah.
these women. So the fact that you are going to, you're cooking up something, it is, I'm buying the tickets. I'm going to be there. I'll wear my mask, obviously. Guys, but
Let's hope we get to a point where we don't have to anymore, guys. Yo.
over it. I'm just like,
Yeah. Yes.
it's just terrible. I can't, I cannot wait. I think you're a gift to us. I think you're a gift to us as Black women. I think you lift us higher, and you are so authentic, and so many people are going to watch this and understand that we have to support you, because when we support you, we support us, because you're in
Sure.
those spaces fighting for us, trying to show this art world that we are interested, that we want in. And my personal goal for myself is to have a home where I can hang very valuable art, valuable both in sentiment to me, but valuable in
Yeah.
getting paid, that is only Black people. That is
Yeah.
absolutely, like, that is what I would love to do. And people like you educate me, you teach me more, you move us forward. You are just amazing, Dr. Same Mdluli. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. May
This was
may you
so
be
amazing.
blessed.
Thank you. Thank you, Loretta. Thank you for your kind words here and the encouragement. Thank you. It means a lot.
It's you're phenomenal. The next time we chat, I hope it will be in person, and then afterwards we can have wine or something, and then laugh.
Yeah. For sure.
So
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
We be blessed. Magwande siyabonga. Do not ever stop, because we need you.
Thank you.
Much
Thank
love.
you. Take care. Bye.